A smile and a cuddle, new pictures embarrass Bill Clinton. Below the dikes, China's flood crisis worsens. Beasley calls for more migrants to boost prosperity. And coming off the boil, but Sydney water crisis not over yet. Good evening, I'm Indira Naidu. The political crisis developing around Bill Clinton's relationship with Monica Lewinsky has taken a new turn tonight. Fresh pictures of the two embracing have been shown across the United States as the President prepares to give evidence to a grand jury. Meantime, debate is continuing over whether Mr Clinton can be impeached for the way he's dealt with the alleged affair.
The embrace which may come to haunt President Clinton. These pictures, unearthed by an American TV network, show him with Monica Lewinsky at a Democrat rally in 1996, when she'd already left the White House. They suggest their relationship continued to be, at the very least, a warm one. Like earlier footage of the couple taken at the White House in the same year, it will add to the pressure on Bill Clinton to come clean. Even more damaging, though, is the controversy over that dress, worn by Monica Lewinsky, now in the hands of the FBI, investigating allegations that it was stained during a sexual encounter with the president. Lawyers for Linda Tripp, Lewinsky's one-time friend, say she was shown the stained dress on 3 separate occasions.
She did see something that appeared to be a stain. What that stain is, Linda doesn't know. The origin of that stain, Linda doesn't know. Quite frankly, it wasn't something that Linda was quite gleeful to see.
So far, support for the president remains strong, at least judging by his reception this weekend on a visit to Long Island. But the investigation by Special Prosecutor Kenneth Starr has led to a frenzy of comment in Washington as to what should happen if the president is shown to have lied about his relationship with Miss Lewinsky.
If in fact there is obstruction of justice, or if he did counsel others to lie under oath, or if he conspired to do these things, these are all felonies, and they're very important. And you just can't, just a mere apology is not enough here.
It would be the height of hypocrisy to suggest, in my view, that on the facts that have been brought forward, that this is a sustainable, impeachable offense.
President Clinton's supporters hope the public sees it that way too and are tiring of the issue.
This has really gotten down to a terribly narrow issue, I believe, and one that I think has most Americans simply shaking their heads, wondering why the country, the presidency, public service in general, are being put through all of this torture.
But as Bill Clinton prepares for his grand jury testimony in 2 weeks' time, this narrow issue is set to dominate the headlines and his every move.
Fighting has erupted again in Kosovo, despite a pledge from Belgrade that its offensive is over. Serbian forces have been clearing out villages across central and western Kosovo. Ethnic Albanians have been forced to flee amid heavy shelling.
Slobodan Milosevic says the Serb offensive is over. But in central Kosovo today, the paramilitary police were once again in action against ethnic Albanian villages. The Serb authorities say that rebel fighters of the Kosovo Liberation Army have attacked them with mortars, machine guns and sniper fire. This, they say, is the response. But to drive the KLA from their positions, the Serbs are also clearing village after village in this region of the civilian population. Every house is searched for evidence of the ethnic Albanian fighters. Today's attacks began soon after daybreak, bringing new casualties and sending a new wave of terrified refugees running from their homes. Mothers carried their babies. There was no time to gather any belongings. Whole areas of Kosovo have now been emptied of their civilian populations. It makes it easier for the Serb authorities to control the rebel fighters, but it also fuels the refugee crisis, which is growing more acute every day. The Serbs say that refugees should return to their homes, but today there's been fighting across central and western Kosovo. It all adds to a worsening climate of fear, and those who fled are far from ready to go back.
With the federal election perhaps only weeks away, the opposition has called for an increase in immigration to counter the ageing of Australia's population. The ALP says the present intake of migrants is about right for current conditions, but not for the long term.
The leader of the opposition is calling for a great debate on immigration, a sophisticated look at population issues like employment and the environment.
We have lost our national consensus on immigration. And I say that is not something to regard with any sense of comfort or relaxation.
Mr Beazley says a Labor government would establish an Office of Population and Immigration in a Department of Employment and Population. Labor says the present annual immigration intake is about right, but not right for the long term.
We need today to think about how we guarantee a sufficient critical mass of employed people to ease what will be a mounting fiscal burden on future generations. Labor knows that immigration can help to keep our country young, and we are prepared to argue the case in these terms.
The federal government says dealing with the ageing population problem with more migration would see a huge increase in the immigration intake.
Now, to do that, you would need to double the numbers of people entering Australia.
Politicians of all persuasions were put on notice today. They'll be closely monitored for racist remarks by a new community group called Race Watch.
This is not a politically correct exercise in zealously monitoring people's language. We're looking for serious areas where people are promoting racist policies such as assimilationism.
On the tax front, the Prime Minister named the day today when the tax package will be released.
There'll be a joint party meeting here in Canberra next Wednesday, the 12th of August. And at that joint party meeting, the colleagues will be asked to approve the plan that has been developed.
Senior government sources say the tax policy will be publicly released the same day as it's revealed to backbench MPs.
A special meeting of National Party MPs has been called for Wednesday in Canberra. It's expected to result in a showdown in which party leader and Deputy Prime Minister Tim Fischer will tackle criticism of his leadership and his stand on Telstra and the proposed new goods and services tax.
Thank you very much.
Queensland National MP Bob Katter has called on Mr Fischer to resign the leadership. Reports from Canberra tonight suggest Mr Fischer might try to expel him from the party. China has tonight taken a bold step in its fight against floods which have ravaged the country for the past 3 weeks. Explosives are being used to blast away key sections of dikes in a bid to save towns and cities. It's a sign of desperation, with the worst floods in 40 years showing no sign of abating. And with the rains now moving northwards, it seems inevitable that the misery and destruction will spread still further.
Living on the edge, literally. This narrow dike in Hunan province is now home to 1,400 people. They fled the village of Shao He Kao as the flooding threatened. Now families and livestock sit it out together in makeshift homes, waiting for the waters to recede. It's a typical story for those living on the edge of the Yangtze River. Its overflowing embankments have left much of China's industrial and agricultural heartland under metres of water. And with the rain still falling, there's no sign of respite.
So when you're talking to people who have lived in these conditions for upwards of 20 days, there's despair, disappointment and depression setting in now.
In Hubei province alone, 12 million people, a fifth of the population, have been mobilised to fight the floods. The Chinese army has ordered soldiers to struggle to the death to shore up crumbling embankments. But within the past hour, the authorities have begun blowing up strategic sections of the dikes to save major towns and cities further downriver. It's a tactic which will mean more flooding and more misery for those living in rural areas. The people of Bangladesh are going through a similar nightmare. The worst flooding there in 10 years has begun to recede, but low-lying areas are still submerged, making daily life difficult for millions of people. The main worry is disease, with some 40,000 people contracting diarrhoea and fevers from the filthy floodwaters. And there could be worse to come, with monsoons upstream threatening a new crisis within the next few weeks. Meanwhile, in South Korea, it's flash flooding which has been doing the damage. 20 people are dead and 71 are missing, mainly holidaymakers who were camping in the scenic Mount Cheery area when it was hit by 22 centimetres of rain in just a few hours. Efforts are still underway to rescue those caught unawares. And in Iran, mudslides triggered by heavy rains have killed at least 30 people in the province of Gilan. Many of the victims were buried in their vehicles as mudslides washed away mountain roads and bridges.
In Indonesia, the son-in-law of former President Suharto is being investigated over human rights abuses. Lieutenant General Prabowo Subianto, who formerly headed the Special Forces, is being questioned over the abduction and torture of 24 political activists earlier this year. Meanwhile, as the new regime of President B.J. Habibie battles to restructure the country, the focus is turning to the way the failing economy is affecting the children of Jakarta.
This is how Indonesia wants the world to see its children. On International Child Day, President B.J. Habibie sat in the garden of the presidential palace serenading a group of specially selected children in front of the TV cameras. But only a few kilometres from the palace, the real Indonesia for another group of youngsters could not be more different. This is Bantar Gebang, where most of Jakarta's rubbish produced by its 15 million people ends up. But one man's trash is another man's treasure, and to the people who live and work here, the dump is their source of income. They're seeking out anything that can be recycled.
It's like ocean of garbage, and there are now 8,000 people, garbage collectors there.
Of those 8,000, about half are children. They've left school and followed their parents to the capital to work.
It is not easy for us to say that it's dangerous, it's toxic, but it's their way of life to survive.
Life is hard for all, but for the youngsters, the work is physically demanding and the hours long.
Saya kemarin jam 7, kadang-kadang jam 8. Saya kemarin untuk mencari sampah gitu. Jam 8 kadang-kadang ada di lapangan. Jam 5 balik atau jam 4.
For many of the children, this could be the only life they'll know.
Sekolah sih ingin, tapi kalau ngorek sih enakan ngorek daripada sekolah kalau nggak capek.
In Bantar Gebang, the child victims of Asia's economic crisis are doing the best they can, the only thing they can, to eat. With Indonesia's economic predicament the worst in Asia, no one is sure for how long the children will continue to arrive and for how long they will have to stay.
On the eve of talks at the United Nations about the future of East Timor, the leader of the island's guerrilla army, Falentel, has denounced the recent Indonesian troop withdrawals as a publicity stunt. Having waged a low-level resistance war for the last 23 years, he's determined to continue fighting for independence, and he's also called for proper international monitoring of the current situation.
Para provar a verdade dos vossos profetas. Escutai às pressas do vosso servo e de todo o vosso povo.
And one of Cambodia's most spectacular temples has once again been opened up to tourists in another sign of the demise of the notorious Khmer Rouge. Civil war has kept the 12th century temple of Preah Vihear off limits to travellers for the last 5 years. Up until recently, it was a stronghold for Khmer guerrillas fighting against the government. Police in Japan are hunting an arsenic poisoner after 4 people died from eating curry laced with arsenic and cyanide. More than 60 others were made ill, over 30 of them still being treated in hospital.
The deadly curry was lunch at a midsummer carnival in the small community of Wakayama near Osaka. Police suspected cyanide poisoning when 4 people died and 67 others took ill. But post-mortems on the victims have also revealed high levels of arsenic, leaving little doubt as to the poisoner's intention to kill. About 20 people cooked the curry in large pots at a local home. One theory is that the pot was tampered with when it was left unattended for almost an hour. But the killer has evaded police capture for almost a week now. A usually popular dish in Japan, curry sales have slumped and community festivals have been cancelled across the nation for fear of copycat attacks. 34 people remain in hospital and 29 others are receiving outpatient treatment. Classmates have held a memorial for one of the victims, a 10-year-old boy. The other deaths included a 16-year-old girl, the head of the local district association and his deputy. Wakayama is a close-knit community with just over 200 residents. Fears that the killer is still among them is producing some radical reactions among frustrated residents who've launched their own self-styled investigations. The witch hunt forcing some to call news conferences after they were mentioned as suspects.
The Sudanese government has declared a ceasefire in all parts of famine-hit southern Sudan. The ceasefire will take effect from tomorrow. The Sudanese army and rebels agreed to a partial truce 2 weeks ago to allow aid shipments to reach starving civilians. The bodyguard who survived the car crash which killed Princess Diana and Dodi Al Fayed has spoken for the first time on television. Speaking ahead of the first anniversary of the crash later this month, Trevor Rees-Jones made a plea for the privacy of himself and his family to be respected. This is his first interview since an earlier collaboration with a British newspaper, and he says it will be the last until the French inquiry is finished.
I'd like everyone to appreciate this August will be a very difficult time for myself, my family and for all the families that have been involved in this tragic accident. I'd like everyone and the press to appreciate that and respect our privacy and let us mark this tragic anniversary in our own way.
Suspected Muslim militants have massacred at least 23 people in the northern Indian state of Himachal Pradesh. The incident occurred near the border with neighbouring Kashmir, where Muslim militants are waging a separatist campaign against India. Fighting is continuing, meanwhile, between India and Pakistani forces along Kashmir's disputed border. At least 90 people have been killed in the exchanges in the past 5 days.
For 4 days, Indian and Pakistani artillery have been trading shells across the line of control that divides them in Kashmir, and this is the result. Destroyed homes, an ever-rising death toll and a flood of refugees, many of them the casualties of war. We've been fired on with rockets and bullets for days, says this refugee. Our homes are demolished, our people are being killed, we're in a terrible state. Those living along the border are calling it all-out war, and Pakistani officials are repeating their traditional line that it's all India's fault for not accepting international arbitration.
It is Indian transigence which is actually creating all these violent situations on the line of control.
But a lot more ominous was the warning from Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, who met his Indian counterpart Atal Bihari Vajpayee in Sri Lanka last week, holding talks that got precisely nowhere. Pakistan followed India into the public nuclear club this year. Sharif today said India must remember there are now 2 nuclear powers on the subcontinent, warning of the alarming consequences of irresponsible policy in Kashmir. India, of course, sees it entirely differently and sees Kashmir as an entirely internal problem. But the Kashmir fighting is a stark reminder of the 3 all-out wars India and Pakistan have fought in the past, and of the fears that a 4th conflict could be a nuclear one.
The federal government will give $1 million to Papua New Guinea to help it cope with the recent tidal wave disaster. The announcement came as PNG Prime Minister Bill Skate arrived in Canberra for talks with John Howard.
A 19-gun salute for the Prime Minister of Australia's nearest neighbour. It's Bill Skate's first visit to Canberra at a time when the bilateral relationship is described as maturing.
We are friends. We respect each other. We will periodically differ.
But while that may be true at a government-to-government level, Mr Skate's message is Papua New Guineans are far from happy with how the Australian media portrays their nation.
They are offended by reporters which show disrespect for Papua New Guinean customs and leaders.
He is, however, grateful for the aid his nation is receiving from Australia to rebuild after the tsunami disaster. Canberra is giving an extra $1 million on top of the $2 million already provided. The money going towards long-term medical assistance and the re-establishment of services and infrastructure. In keeping with established practice, it won't go directly to the PNG government.
We would pay directly for those particular projects. We think that is the most intelligent way of doing it.
In fact, distributing all overseas donations has been taken out of the hands of the nation's politicians. A private accounting firm will monitor how it's spent.
It's very transparent, accountable, and I think it will be put in the right place for projects that will benefit the people of Papua New Guinea.
On a more positive note, a memorandum of understanding was signed for a $3.1 billion project to pipe natural gas from PNG's Southern Highlands. It will provide fuel for an aluminium smelter in Gladstone and power generation in Townsville.
The Sydney water emergency has eased slightly, with more suburbs given the all-clear tonight. But businesses are demanding compensation for millions of dollars in lost revenue.
Teams of microbiologists continued testing water samples from all over Sydney today, trying to clear the city region by region. They looked for organisms and other forms of bacteria, such as Giardia and Cryptosporidium, which contaminated the entire Sydney water supply. By late today, nearly 100 suburbs, or 600,000 residents, mainly in Sydney's west and southwest, were given the all-clear to drink water straight from the tap. Seeking to find out who's to blame for the crisis, the state government has broadened its inquiry into the fiasco, announcing that it will have an independent chairman.
I want to know, on behalf of the people of Sydney, what's happened here. I want to know, on their behalf, as their representative, what went wrong, and if anybody made it go wrong, who that person was.
And so does the business community, especially those who rely on clean water, such as fishmongers, who've had to buy expensive spring water to wash their oysters.
$50, $60 we spend every day.
Just on water?
Water, yeah.
Lawyers preparing class action suits say businesses are demanding millions of dollars in compensation for suffered losses.
We believe they have good claims under the Trade Practices Act for the cost of, for example, having to obtain bottled water, having to employ extra staff to work in food preparation areas, having to advise guests in hotels of the danger of drinking Sydney water over the last period.
Meanwhile, residents in areas yet to get the all-clear are asked to continue to boil their water for 1 minute, and those in areas declared safe should turn on their taps and let the water run for 2 minutes to ensure it's fresh and clean.
Business news now, and resources giant BHP has a new chairman. The outgoing managing director of the National Australia Bank, Don Argus, will fill the hot seat from early next year. He'll replace Jerry Ellis, who's due to retire. Mr Argus's first challenge will be to find a new chief executive for the troubled company. Meantime, the Hong Kong stock market nosedived today. The Hang Seng Index down almost 5%, accelerating the trend of the last 2 weeks. Dealers blamed expectations of poor growth figures and a weaker yen. And the Australian share market followed the slump in Asian markets to close more than 1% lower. Tokyo lost more than 1.25%, while Wall Street was closed for the weekend. The Australian dollar was down against all the major currencies. To motor racing, and Finnish driver Mika Hakkinen is a step closer to capturing his first Formula One championship after winning last night's German Grand Prix at Hockenheim. Hakkinen led from start to finish to clinch his 6th race victory of the season. His teammate David Coulthard took second place in a repeat of last week's Austrian Grand Prix. Tomorrow's weather now. Brisbane, a few showers 22, Sydney cloudy 19, Canberra late rain 13, late showers for Hobart 15 and Melbourne 16. Adelaide intermittent rain 14, Perth a shower or two 18 and a fine day for Darwin 32. In our region, Auckland 15, Beijing 32, Kuala Lumpur 33, Manila 33 and Port Moresby 26. And around the world, Athens 37, Beirut 32, Istanbul 33, Johannesburg 23 and New York 27. And finally, a story from the past with familiar echoes in the present. A book has just been published about the life of an American leader of the 1920s, President Harding. During an eventful career in the White House, he's alleged to have had at least 7 affairs.
Historians don't consider Warren Harding America's worst president, just the most scandalous.
He was very popular, very good-looking, very easygoing, had a lovely speaking voice.
Harding hobnobbed with celebrities, and in the midst of Prohibition, Harding served alcohol at White House parties. And there was the administration official who shot himself. The suicide note mysteriously disappeared. And then there were the mistresses, at least 7 of them, according to Carl Anthony, author of a new book about First Lady Florence Harding.
The only people who really knew about Harding's affairs
were high officials in the Republican Party who were involved in providing blackmail money, some $25,000 to pay off one woman.
That woman was Carrie Phillips, the First Lady's best friend, who threatened to release love letters from Harding unless she was compensated. Another was Nan Britton, the 20-year-old campaign worker who claimed Harding fathered her daughter. It's believed Secret Service agents escorted the woman into a small room off the Oval Office, where she and Harding would meet. All this paled in comparison to the great oil scandal.
If anyone remembers anything about Harding, it's two words: Teapot Dome.
That became the administration's biggest embarrassment. Harding's Interior Secretary, a man named Albert Hall, leased out Navy oil reserves in Teapot Dome, Wyoming. In exchange for $500,000 in kickbacks, Mr. Hall became the first cabinet member ever to go to jail. Throughout the scandals, Harding had a strong, consistent ally. His wife Florence, an ambitious and controversial First Lady who fought for women's rights. Even so, after President Harding died mysteriously in San Francisco, rumors spread that Florence had poisoned him, payback for all the womanizing. But historians now dispute that.
Oh, he wasn't poisoned. That's nonsense. Oh, God, no. He had a heart condition. And ultimately died of a stroke.
Harding is credited with many domestic successes, including budget reform and the 40-hour work week. But he is remembered less for those successes than for the scandals.
And that's the World News tonight. Indira and I do for the World News at 9. We'll leave you with pictures of the opening ceremony for this year's Gay Games in Amsterdam. Around 15,000 competitors will compete in events ranging from ballroom dancing to wrestling in oil. Good night.